sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells me of a Savior's love who died and set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy shore, dear Lord, to thy shore.
Okay, welcome to Pilgrim United Church of Christ on this second sermon during our COVID-19 captivity. I'm glad to greet you from the pulpit once again. We are working our way through this with no definite end in sight. The end will eventually arrive and life will begin anew with a whole new perspective. I trust that we gain something from this time. So I'm here in the sanctuary. Dennis Prue is back there. Kara and Andrew are here as well, and I'm going to discharge and proclaim a sermon for you now. The text comes from the Gospel according to John, the 4th chapter, and we just did a dry run a minute ago, and I realize it's a long passage, and you're going to get lost. So I'm just going to touch on the important aspects of it. It's Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well in Samaria. So here we go. The word of the Lord. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard, Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized. He left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came by to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." You see, Jesus' disciples had gone into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman from Samaria?" Because Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and his sons and his flocks who drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water, gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty or have to come here again to draw water." So Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. So what you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see you are a prophet. Well, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship God neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship God must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, the one called the Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." The word of the Lord. Emphasis is on Jesus having to go through Samaria. He had to go through Samaria. It wasn't just a geographical thing where he had to get just from one place to another. Like, why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side, right? Why did Jesus cross through Samaria? To get to the other side? No. He had business to take care of in Samaria. He had to go through this situation with the woman at the well. This is something he had to do. It was important. The poet Robert Frost said in one of his poems, "The only way out is through." COVID-19, what we are going through now, there appears to be no way out of this ordeal. So we are all going through it together. The only way out of this is through it. And God can make things happen with us as we go through it. There's no way out. We're going to go through. Jesus had to go through Samaria. And when you hear in the Gospel of John, as we heard today, that Jesus had to do something, he would say things like, "I must do this now, for this is the will of the Father." The must has to do with God's purposes for Jesus at the time. He had to do this because God intended for this encounter with the Samaritan woman to take place, so that we 2,000 years later can benefit when we go through what we are going through. This encounter was not planned by Jesus, but it was willed by God. He had to go through Samaria. He had to meet this woman. It was important. Winston Churchill said during World War II, "When you are going through hell, just keep going. You have to go through. We are going through this. Even though we did not plan this, there are good intentions by God for us as we go through it. You know, we're going through Lent as well. I planned to give up ice cream during Lent. La-di-da, ice cream, hip hip hooray. Only to discover I would be going through something other than Lent. And I would be giving up a lot more things than just ice cream, just like you have had to. It's one thing to plan to give up something during Lent. It's quite another to have a lot of things taken from you during Lent. I did not know a few weeks ago that I would be giving up sports for Lent. There's no sports to be seen. And consequently, I have given up ESPN.com for Lent. Because when I go there, there are no scores to see. I've given up those things for Lent. I did not plan this. But now I'm going through it, and so are you. You did not plan to give up church attendance during Lent. But here it has come, and there's no way out of this. And so we're going through it together, through sermons like this and through contacting each other during this. It's unplanned by us, but maybe it's willed by God for our good in a great many ways. So I'm going to go through COVID-19 as a preacher and pastor. It's what I do. I did not plan it, but I will go through it. And we will go through COVID-19 together because there's no way out except going through it. And Jesus went through Samaria, and we're going through what we're going through. And imagine the things that can happen when we go through it together. You know, there is no, at the present time, I have to go to church. You do not have to be there at the other end of this screen. You are free to do whatever you want. So here's my question. Well then, why are you here? Have you considered why it is that you are here? When you discover what is truly important to you, you finally come to be your true self, which is what Jesus brings out in us when he encounters us. Why are you here? Because you don't have to be. Or maybe you're thinking, yes, I do have to be. I have to be from the standpoint of my spiritual health. I have to be connected, even though I don't technically have to be here. You see, there's a difference between the inferior form of have to and the superior form of have to. If I were going to do a children's sermon today and I'd sit on my stool and I'd try to be clever and funny, I would probably talk about when I was a young boy, one of the things that at least my dad tells me now all these years later that I would say repeatedly is, do I have to? You know, when you're a kid, you're constantly being told what you're supposed to do or have to do. And you say, do I have to? Well, when you become an adult, you discover, yes, there are some things that we have to do, like pay taxes or whatever. But there are other things beyond those sort of inferior have-tos that are superior, that you have to do it because if you do not, life is just not as good. Screen's gone dead. Does that mean anything?
Go ahead. Talk. Go ahead.
I'm going ahead. So my point is there's an inferior have-to and a superior have-to. It is the superior have-to that really makes us come alive. And it's about time we discover it for each one of us. The inferior is probably not what brought you to this sermon today. You did not necessarily do this as a duty. You are doing it as a way to remain alive and strong spiritually. Yes, we have to do some things. They are that important. It goes beyond just, I have to. You know, in my family, we have the Swedish saying, Jag måste göra det. In other words, I have to do it. You know, we used to ask my grandfather, so are you okay? He says, I have to be. By that he means he really doesn't have a choice if he wants to enjoy the one life he lives. Yes, he has to be okay, and he will do what he has to do in order for his life to be of some meaning, purpose, and pleasure for him. I must do it. A couple weeks ago, the Bishop of Fall River waived the weekly Mass obligation for Roman Catholics. So for them, there is no have to go to church. in an obligatory way. They are now free to do what they want to do. I would imagine some of them, though, have discovered, no, I have to somehow stay connected spiritually. Whether it is to my congregation or other means, I have to, because it is that important to me, even though the bishop says I don't have to in an inferior way. So you are under no obligation. But this is an opportunity for you to discover and to consider what it is truly that you have to do in a superior way, because that'll tell you a lot about who you are. It means a lot. It was not an inferior have to that led a musical composer called Shostakovich to premiere his Seventh Symphony in Leningrad during the winter of 1942. The German armies were surrounding Leningrad. It was a time of cold, of starvation. People were demoralized, and Shostakovich premiered his Seventh Symphony in the midst of all of that. And they set up the loudspeakers so that not only the citizens of Leningrad could hear this beautiful music performed by the Leningrad Symphony, but so that the Germans could hear it as well. And the Germans would understand the psychological warfare of a bunch of people who were so determined to live that they were going to let music play even during this time. And so for Shostakovich, he did not have to do it, but in a certain sense, he had to do it, and Leningrad had to experience it. It was a way for them to come alive. And performing that Seventh Symphony in March of 1942, while they were starving, while they were under siege from a foreign army, the music played. And the morale soared in Leningrad. It wasn't because Shostakovich had to do it. It was because they had to experience this. Do you understand the difference between the inferior have to and the superior? There are some things that are so important. And so worship, what we're going through now, I would hope for you is a have to in the superior sense, because it keeps your morale and your sanity up. Jesus said worship is not about a temple, and it's not about a mountain. It is where there is a fountain, not a mountain. By that he meant a fountain of life, the Spirit of God coming upon people. That is so important that people have to have it more than they need even the food in order to keep their spirits up and themselves alive. He uses water, metaphorically, as a way that people need in order to remain biologically healthy and alive. But he uses water in the sense that there is a way that keeps us spiritually alive and spiritually nourished. And it is that water that keeps you going. And you have to have it because it what makes you come alive. So think about this. What is the well that you are drawing from during this time? You know, there's such a thing as drawing from dry wells. Drawing from things that are not sustaining and not nourishing. You know, guilt is an example of a dry well. You know, you'd sometimes do things out of guilt. I guess I have to do this, so I'll go ahead and do it. And it's not spiritually sustaining or nourishing. It doesn't really make you come alive. You do it more out of a sense of guilt. Well, there are all kinds of other things that people do that are not necessarily nourishing, satisfying, and sustaining, that are dry wells. What are the things you're doing now during this time we are going through? Are they dry wells, or are there wells of living water? So why are you here? I'm going to ask you that once again. Consider it. It's important. You know, why am I here? Well, you know, in a certain sense, I have to, because I have a duty as pastor to keep this thing going. But I'm doing this for a more superior have to. Do you know that I'm doing this as much as anything for the sake of my sanity? It is weekly sermon preparation and sermon proclamation that keeps my head straight, that keeps me spiritually alive. If I didn't have this, wow, I'd be in trouble. I'm here because I have to in the superior sense. It makes me come alive. It's a have to. It's who I truly am. Who are you truly? What are the things that keep you going? So the Samaritan woman was there to meet Jesus. And the text says that she was there at noon. And some people have wondered, now why is she there at noon? What is that all about? Because what we understand, they say, is that people would draw water only in the morning and only in the evening. But why is she there at noon? So some people have concluded that as a result of that she was sort of a loose woman, a floozy. You know, she didn't want to go there, and so she kept social distance from everybody else because she was sort of ashamed. She was an outcast, and so she didn't want any closeness with anyone. So she kept social distance, and she happened to be there at noon that day. The interesting thing about this is that the passage never says that about her. In some ways, she probably doesn't want to face people, and people might turn their faces from her, but it may not be because of that reason that I explained about her. It could very well be that she's hurting, that she is a woman who's gone through a lot of pain. She had 5 husbands. It doesn't say anything about them, but it could very well be that some of them died, and she had gone through widowship a few times. It could be that some of them just decided they'd chase after some young woman instead, and so they sent her packing, and she's hurting. I don't know. It's very possible that that is the case. But she's there that day because she's struggling to get through one day after another. That's basically what her life is. Can I get through this day? And so she's keeping social distance. But the interesting thing about Jesus is he draws near. And he draws near to people who are socially distancing because of shame or whatever else. He draws near to them. Why? Because he has to. He doesn't have to in sort of the obligatory sense, the inferior sense. He has to out of love. It is that important to him to encounter people that he draws near to her. And he talks to her and says, you can be who you truly are. You do not have to be a victim of what other people say about you. You can come alive. You can have living water. You know, the guy up in Lexington, what was his name? Dennis, you know, the Emerson. Emerson once said, to be yourself in a world that is always trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment of all. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else. People have been trying to make something of that woman for 2,000 years, when in fact, she may be far different from what people are saying about her. And Jesus knew her, and she came to a living well that day. She came to herself. Yes, she had to go and fetch a pail of water. And she did not plan to meet Jesus, but they went through this encounter together. She came out the other side who she truly was, what was truly important to her, how she, from that point forward, had to live in order that she might be alive. That's what we're talking about today. We are going through this even though we didn't plan it. But what do we really have to do now that makes us come alive? Savor that, consider that, and carry that with you through each day. To be yourself is what truth is in the Gospel of John. To become who God has in store for you, you might say, is the truth. Truth is the most profound you that you can be. And you discover what you can be and who you truly are when you discover what you really have to do to come alive, in the superior sense. What well are you drawing from? You will discover who you are when you discover what you have to do in order for life to have more meaning and purpose and to be far better. Now, you do not have to be viewing this if you're still with me. That's the inferior sense. But I hope you keep listening to me, because out of this you might find a superior sense of who you are, who you truly are. What is the truth for you? You know, Pontius Pilate, when he had Jesus on trial, asked that question. What is truth? He was interrogating Jesus to determine whether Jesus should be crucified. And Jesus said to Pilate, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And they listen to the voice because they know they have to in order to come to themselves and to come alive. Well, Pilate concluded, after interrogating Jesus, that he could find no cause to have Jesus arrested and crucified. He knew that if he were to do what was truly right and just, he would have to release Jesus. But the crowd clamored. The world told Pilate who he was and what he had to do, how to please their demands. And so what did he do? He did what they were insisting that he do. He did the expedient. He was under pressure from the crowd rather than what he knew was right, what he had to do for the sake of truth and righteousness. And so he was not the truth. He did not plan to put Jesus on trial, but he did not go through the path toward righteousness and toward what was true. Nope, he wanted to get out, and so he did. And he suffered guilty conscience from that point forward. Nope, Pilate, you were wrong. The only way out is to go through, and you chose to go out rather than to go through toward the truth. You did what you think you had to do rather than what you really had to do in the depths of your heart in order for you to be true. Well, anyhow, we conclude. Friends, Dennis, Kara, Andrew, you did not plan to go through COVID-19. But now that we're here, the only way out is to go through. And I hope that during this time you will find your superior have to, the spiritual water that makes you come alive. In your social distance during this time, Jesus is coming near to you. Not because he has to in an inferior sense, but because he has to in a superior sense, because he loves you and wants you to come alive in him so that you can be who you truly are. Let's go through this together. I've enjoyed being with you today. I will see you again soon.
Decide now to follow Jesus.